and happy to have Dr. Roxanne Gonzales Walker here with us today. And she's going to be giving her talk entitled FurEver Homing, How You Can Help. So she's going to let us know about helping wonderful puppies and kitties today. And I will hand it on over.
Thank you, Renee. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for attending today. When I was asked if I would be interested in doing another session last year, I did one on veterans. I thought, well, what in the world can I do? And I thought, well, I love dogs. I'm okay with cats. My husband's the cat person. We always have a cat in the house. My husband's theory is that for every dog you should have that much poundage in cat. So at one point we had an Irish Wolfhound who weighed 185 pounds, and he could just see the house burgeoning with pussycats. But I do have a bias towards dogs. But there are some things about pussycats in here as well. So what I thought about doing is I'm actually on the board of the Animal Welfare Coalition up here in Las Vegas. And I've always gotten a lot of our animals from shelters, but since I've been on the board, I have learned so much about what these shelters do, how they help the community. I really had no clue about what does it mean to be an animal shelter. So with that, I do have some slides, and I'm going to share my screen so we can walk through. And as I did this, it occurred to me that I actually didn't know a lot about the history. So I used this as an opportunity not only to share with you my interest and my passion, but to also find out, where did these come from? We lived in the UK for a number of years, and the British are extremely passionate about their dogs and their cats, but they're very passionate about their dogs. And so I thought I would start with some of the animals in our family that we have rescued from the shelters. This is Baron. He was an 8-year-old German Shepherd my son inherited, and he lived to about 13. This is Maya. She came from a hoarding situation, and she died around 13 or 14. So these guys live a long time. This is Toby. He's actually an import from Italy. He came back from Italy with a army soldier, and when he got deployed, he didn't have anywhere to take his dog. So my son found him at the shelter and inherited him. This is Bear. He belongs to my son. He's a cute little guy. He's same age. He was raised with my grandson. And this is Miss Bryn. She's having a hard time this week. She's almost 16. Sorry, but she's a sweetie. This is Sierra. She's the police dog of the house. She keeps everybody in line. She's our dog. And this is Tula. We just adopted her in January over at the shelter here. She'd been in a terrible accident, and we have a wonderful, wonderful director there named Tina. And Tina took her to get her taken care of at the vets down in Santa Fe, and she's an amputee, but she's a sweet little girl. And this is Eve. She's an Oklahoma dog. These aren't all mine. They belong to our family. So you can see that there's a beautiful variety of animals that you can get. And I didn't put any pussycats, so I'm sorry. So what I discovered was that animal shelters and the idea of taking care of animals really goes back quite a ways in our country. And it starts back in Massachusetts. You know, that's some of our founding colonies are back east, although the Southwest had Europeans here for a long time. But they actually had a legislative body that this is their law, that any tyranny or cruelty, and I love the way they spell cruelty, towards any brute creature, which are usually kept for a man's use, are mandated periodic rest and refreshment for any cattle being driven or led. In other words, as I read more about this legislation, this was really embedded in sort of a Puritan biblical thinking about when we fell from the Bible perspective of this, when we fell from grace, we were then put in charge of the animals on the earth. And it was our responsibility to make sure that they were well taken care of, even though they were there for us to help with our plowing and, you know, for food and refreshment and, you know, nutrition. We still had to take them. So I found that this was really quite interesting, that you're raising cattle, but you still need to take care of them. They need to be fed. They need to have rest. and you treat them with respect and honor. I thought that was a really kind of an interesting component here in this country. I mentioned the UK. In 1890 or 24, they started this Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, and eventually the royalty decided that they were going to get on board and support this organization. So it became the Royal SPCA. And you know, when we see pictures of the royal family over there, they've always got their corgis, and I think Julie, you've got corgis as well. And so you've always see them with their corgis or their wolfhounds or their deerhounds or their hunting dogs. So living in the UK became very clear to me that they really take care of their animals. They're part of the families there, and they still, you know, they have working dogs, but they take very good care of their animals. So here in our country, shelters initially were used to help control overpopulation. I know when I drive around New Mexico, especially when I'm out in the smaller towns, we see dogs. We see them here in Las Vegas just running wild. They've not been spayed or neutered, and so we have a lot of puppies and kitty cats. We have a lot of animals that don't have any controlled population, and it puts a burden on society in general. We're going to talk about shelters and controlling animals and how it actually helps us maintain human health and community environments. Interestingly enough, if you've seen pictures of the Civil War, and they're horrible pictures, but you see the soldiers on the grounds, but you'll also see a lot of horses that were also killed during the Civil War. And that really got people sort of going and thinking we need to take better care of our animals that we use to help support things we do. So you'll see that in New York, the New York legislature actually started to build a groundswell of individuals who said we need to take care of the animals, and for those people who do abuse animals, we need to prosecute them. And that's when we really started to kind of get an idea that people who are abusive to animals could have other types of crime that they commit against society. It goes back this far that they began to see a correlation between the two. And we've all heard of Birch, this American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals actually started in '66 as a sort of the precursor, if you will, to our animal control officers. They actually had people in uniform that would go out and give citations and arrest people to enforce the law. What I find really exciting is that this Caroline Earl White was the first person to start what we would consider a real animal shelter. When I read up on her, it was really kind of funny in some ways that she's protecting animals, and she got a lot of people on board with her, but she wasn't even eligible to vote at the time. Yet she was doing these wonderful things for society. And some of the things that they started to do was they started to get dogs licensed, not cats, but they started to license animals so they know who they belong to, so that they could see them as, if your dog is running wild and it destroys my fence, I know who the dog belongs to now, so I can now go and charge you for the repair of my fence. So part of it was to make sure that they could protect their own properties as well as the public safety. So if my dog went out and bit somebody, if it was licensed, I could then charge you for my medical care. Another piece that I thought was interesting in looking at the history was you've got animal protection and child protection kind of beginning to go in parallel in society as to where the two need to meet. If you think about some of the literature that we read, especially during the Industrial Revolution at the turn of the century, children were used for heavy labor. And so the animal protection and child labor laws all began at the same time. And I find that really kind of interesting in so many ways, that, if you will, children were placed in the same category as dogs and cats and horses. It's a little sad. Well, it's very sad to think that we had to think about them in that same way. And then in Pennsylvania really began. Pennsylvania is a great state in terms of how they take care of their shelters. New Hampshire's another one, if you want to look at some really high legislative states for how to take care of animals, not just dogs, cats, but goats and pigs and horses. New Hampshire and Pennsylvania have some of the more stringent laws in the country. And then in 1916, we have this notion of the animals that were used during World War I, which relates down into World War II, of how we use our animals for service for our veterans. And today, of course, we think of all the animals that we train for the disabled, for the blind, the hearing. My husband was in, we were somewhere a couple of weeks ago. Oh, we were at Kirtland Air Force Base. We needed to get a pass for my brother or my son to get in. And there was a gentleman there who had his service dog with him. And the man, my son, dropped his keys, and the dog went over and picked up his keys and gave him to my son. And it was really interesting that not only was that dog trained to help the disabled veteran, but he was there to help everybody that needed help. And it was really, my husband said it was one of the best trained dogs he'd ever seen. This is a picture of Carolyn. I found some cool old pictures. And again, that first legislation was often related to the care of horses. So now we're getting up a little bit into where we're more in modern society. People didn't keep dogs and cats as pets until the 1930s and 1940s. And that really was as a result of the medications that if you had an injured animal on the farm, we began to see the rise of the veterinary practice with medicines to keep them living longer, to help those animals live. Same thing, so it started to extend to the dogs. What I thought was really quite amusing is that we started to see cats in dogs, or cats indoors, because of the invention of cat litter. I just find that interesting. I did not realize that cat litter really began to be the piece where we started bringing kitty cats into the house. Prior to that, they were all outside. And if we look at the list of history here in the 70s, when I was growing up, I know I can remember people taking cats, litters of kittens, and just kind of releasing them into the wild because they didn't want the kitty cats. But up until the 70s, euthanasia was really the method of what the animal shelter was for. When we see the early movies, I'm thinking Lady and the Tramp and what have you, you see that the animal shelter is a place of, it's dark and it's scary. It's because it's the place animals will go to die because they don't have a home. But then in the 70s, we start going in another direction. We start going in a direction where vets are really helping not only family members with owning dogs and cats and bringing them into their home more as a family member, as opposed to the dog who helps guard the house, staying outdoors. And then in the 90s, we start looking at the no-kill shelters, which is something that I think we think of today. So it was really kind of interesting for me to go and take a look at the history. I had no clue of where we are today. And today, I think we're in a very different place. I'm actually looking at a master's degree in, it's called shelter medicine. And it's intended for people who work in shelters. They have a certificate. And one of the roles we don't often think about with the animal shelter is how it helps protect the public. And so this is a course description from the University of Florida's course, one of their introductory courses. And I thought it was a real interesting, I'm not going to read it to you, but take the time to take a look at it. It really does, I think, demonstrate the link between animals that are running loose in the communities, whether it be dogs or cats, and the health of that community and the protection of that community. Think about the number of times when you've seen somebody walking and they're walking with a stick. They're walking with a stick often around here to shoo away the dogs that are roaming, because we don't know if those dogs have had their vaccinations. We don't know if they're violent. I've heard many, many stories since I've been on the board of dogs attacking pet dogs, the roaming dogs, the feral dogs attacking pet dogs, causing injury and sometimes even death. And to the pet owner, that's a lot of money that they're spending. The notion they help control this notion of the zoonoses is infections, diseases that can go from animal to person, like rabies, for example. So really, to me, the more I've learned about working on the board and working with the animal shelter, it really is not just about the animals. It's about safety to the community. It's about making sure that we don't have a run on rabies. We don't have parvo, which is a very deadly disease for dogs and cats, that we control the animals in a manner that, that some cats are feral and they're never going to go back to being, they're never going to be domesticated. But it's really about how we protect the community in a way that's healthy for both the animals and the community. So I thought that was, I'm learning so much more. And I have this poor little puppy dog. This is a before and after picture. But if you'll look at that up to 70 million dogs and pussycats live on their own strays in the country. That's a lot of animals. So one of the areas that's becoming real popular with the shelters is fostering. So we get animals in, and they're assessed by the team at the animal shelter. And if they're deemed, healthy and somebody that can be socialized, but they need some time to be with a family to learn how to be a dog or be a cat, they look for fosters, people just like foster children, somebody who can take that animal in and help it get healthy, help it learn how to be a dog or a cat, and just be around people and children. So there's a huge need out there for fostering. So that's one way that you can get involved. Maybe you have one dog and you think, well, I'd like a pet, but I don't want a full-time, but I'm willing to help out. There's a lot of need for fostering of sick and older dogs and cats as well. So earlier we talked about these uniformed patrol officers, and we call them animal control officers today. And I thought it would be interesting to sort of, when we watch movies, we watch cartoons, they're the guys that go out with that loop thing and they capture the puppy dogs and pussycats and they throw them into the shelters and we never know what happens to them. Well, that's not all they do. They do help bring in animals that are dangerous, and some are. They're feral and they're very protective of their territory. But they also help out in the community with education. They help us trap the animals, get them spayed and neutered. They cite people. So, it's against the law here in New Mexico to keep your dog chained. And if your dog is chained, you can put them out there for a few minutes to do their business, but you're not supposed to keep them trained 24 hours a day. They can cite people for that. My neighbor we just moved over to the golf course, and we've never lived around other dogs. And now I'm wondering, we've got a fence, and now I'm worried about what happens if my dogs start barking. If my dogs start barking and the neighbors get upset, they'll call animal control and we'll get a citation. We'll probably get a warning, but then we'll get a citation. So they do a lot for the community. They're the ones that actually control the licensing and making sure that the shots are up to date. But they do more than just capturing animals. And I think, it says investigating cases of animal cruelty. That goes beyond dogs and cats. That goes to abuses of goats and pigs. If you see some horses that are in a field that belong to someone and you see them emaciated, we would be calling animal control to take care of them. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our animal shelter here in town, the Animal Welfare Coalition of Northeastern New Mexico. We serve both Las Vegas and San Miguel County, and we are contracted by the state. And I'm going to stop sharing this screen and hopefully share a screen. I want to show you, where did it go? Looks like I need to go to the report card first. Let's see if I can open it. All right. I want to share the screen. So you can go to our website, and for every year we have to submit, the director has to submit a report, and you'll find this for all animal shelters. So if you live in Texas or you live in Kentucky, you can go to their shelter site and they should have a list of report cards. And I find them very helpful. For me, this was when I was first on the board, a huge eye opener for me, because you can see the beginning, how many we start the year off in January, how many we had, how many puppy dogs, pussycats, and totals. And you can see what happens there. You can see how many animals we transfer in, how many the shelter transfers out, how many were adopted. There's a lot of animals that get sent out of state. Believe it or not, Colorado doesn't have enough dogs to people. There's more demand for dogs than there are dogs in the shelters in Colorado. So we're able to get rid of, to transport our dogs up there. And then you can see actually how many animals were euthanized and for what reason. So we're not a no-kill shelter, but I think almost anybody who works in this environment these days will say we only do it if we absolutely have to. I showed you Bryn, the dog that's 16 now. She was actually put in the shelter at 6 months old, and we adopted her. She'd been in the shelter for a year, and she had been taken home by 40 different families and brought back. She's a part sighthound, she's part greyhound, and they're very aloof animals. They're not like golden retrievers. They're kind of aloof, and we knew what she was. And of course, we've had her all this time. So sometimes it takes a while to find a good home for these animals. But I think you might find this really interesting. And one of the questions I first had is, so how does an animal die in the shelter? Why would it lose its life? Well, part of it's because they're sick when they come in, and it just happens to pass during custody. And I've lost my PowerPoint, so hang on, I've got to go back to it. Here we go. Let me bring that back up, and I'll close out this side. So I would really encourage you to go to your local shelter site and have a look and see what their report card looks like. I think it's very telling to be able to do that. I'm very pleased and proud to be associated with our shelter here in Las Vegas. So what do we do here? What is the team that works really very, very hard over there? They do spay neuter clinics, but they also collect feral cats. We have a lot of feral cats in the city, and so they do trap the cats. They take them to get spayed, and we have that all comes from donations. They get spayed or neutered, and they release them back in. And the idea behind that is, of course, they can't reproduce. They also have we have health clinics. We didn't do one last year. We were trying to do 2 a year, but COVID really prevented us from doing our health clinic. We were going to do one next month, but again, COVID prevented us. But for $5, people can bring their pets in, and they get their shots, they get chipped, and they get a little health check from a vet. So for $5, you can bring your pets in. I think we had, I'll probably get the number wrong, but I want to say well over 150 the first time we did this. So we had 2 vets, and they get little baggies of goodies. One of the things that the shelter also does is they will be notified of people who are hoarding animals. I think the first hoarding situation that I was exposed to was almost 2 years ago now, and I want to say it was over 60 animals here in the community. And these animals were in just horrible, horrible shape. I didn't have her picture up there. There's a little orange dog that we adopted during COVID named Moxie. And she had never been with humans. She had never been in a house. She had never been in a car. She didn't know what it was to get regular food. In fact, she didn't drink water very often when we first got her. She would go 24 hours without having to go to the bathroom. She would eat anything she could get her hands on. And we've had her for over a year now, and she's still, I remember the first time she touched real grass, first time she touched snow. She's terrified still of a car. She doesn't know what to do with it. And she's beginning to learn how to be a dog. She was about 18 months old. She's learning how to play with toys, and we're socializing her with another dog. But it's really very sad. And a lot of those dogs, because they had never been around humans, they were not healthy. A number of them had to be euthanized. And that's a very sad thing to do. And I think the person who did the hoarding really probably thought they were doing a good thing. But in reality, it's sad. And we have more and more of these around our area here. They work with transfers, as I mentioned. They also do training. We have we send our team members out to do training, and they do behavior training. If you go to the website, you can become friends with them on Facebook. Every Thursday, they do behavior training. They'll help you train a dog or a kitty cat when you get them. They do a lot of education as well. When you adopt a dog, you get a whole packet of information from them. And the other piece, and they distribute resources to family, and they do this in conjunction with community members, volunteers, and with the animal control officers. As it gets cold, you'll probably see them going into different areas and giving out bales of hay, blankets, and igloos because some people keep their animals outside in the real cold. And so they also help the community make sure that their animals are comfortable and safe and not being put in harm's way. So how can you help your shelter? First thing you can do is, if you have an animal, get it licensed. Make sure that your animal has all of its shots, but get your help with the licensing. They can always use donations. And for your local shelter, for donations, cash is always a high priority. But if you want to donate food and things like that, I would suggest you contact your shelter and say, I'd like to donate some food. What kind do you want? Because they do want to give some high quality food. Volunteer, even if it's just to walk the dogs. We have some of our athletes here at Highlands go over to the shelter 2 or 3 days a week. We have different teams. They go walk the dogs. Support the events. I'm going to put a plug in here. We have an art bar coming up for our annual donations. Support those events that they do, and promote the work in the community. Now that you know a little bit more about what the animal control officer does and what the shelters do, when somebody goes, oh, that animal shelter, blah, 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 I say, well, you know, they do a lot of good in the community. There's a lot of wonderful things that they do to help us as citizens. And just get involved if you can. Be a foster parent if you can, and that takes commitment. So I randomly listed some of the shelters that we have here in New Mexico. I don't know if you will get these slides. Renee, do they get copies of the slides?
We could certainly arrange that, and this will all be recorded, so the slides
great.
will be available in the recording as well.
So I tried to go through some of the shelters. There's a lot of them. So there's also different types of shelters. There's people who set up their own shelter. Some of those are for profit. And so you want to be careful when you go to a shelter to see if it's a for-profit shelter, or is it something that's done by the county or the city. So there's 2 different types of shelters. So how about your pet? What are you going to do for your pet? First thing is know your local law. If you live in Albuquerque, Santa Fe, Dallas, Omaha, Nebraska, know what the local law is for your pets. How many can you own? If you live in a city, you may be restricted to how many. I think here in Las Vegas, you can only own 3 dogs. License your pet. It's the best thing you can do. So if your pet gets lost, they can find you. There's a group in New Hampshire called Granite State Recovery, and they spend thousands of dollars, and they post every day all these dogs. I don't know why all these dogs get lost in New Hampshire. I mean, I can see up to 5, 6 a day, and I could think, what's going on in New Hampshire that all these dogs are getting lost? And the one thing that seems to happen the most is that they're not chipped or they're not licensed. And if they're not licensed, they can't track you down. If they have chips, they're often not kept up to date. So there's no way to get a hold of you. The other thing is to put a little tag with a name and number on them, the name tags. Get your animals vaccinated, because if they do get lost, if they do run away, you really want to do as much as you can. So when you get them back, they won't have picked up something like rabies or parvo or distemper. And of course, regular checkups. And if you're not going to breed your animal, and there's a lot of debate on this, if you're not going to breed your animal, do consider spay or neuter. We like Irish Wolfhounds. We've had 4, and there's a lot of debate in that community of not doing either of those things until the dogs are about 2 years old. So, you know, if you do get a dog or a cat, do consider spay and neuter, unless you're if you're breeding them, and train them. That's one of the best things you can do, is train them. And then the last thing to protect your pet would be to socialize them. This little girl, Moxie, that we got, boy, she's still getting socialized. She's doing a lot better, but not having been around people for 18 months, and we think she had several litters of puppies, 2 or 3 litters of puppies. She doesn't know what people are, and she doesn't know how to trust them. So you're thinking of getting a pet. Do you go to a breeder, or do you go to a shelter, or do you go to a breed rescue? That's a huge debate as well. And for me, we've, up until, I want to say about 15 years ago, we did all of our dogs through breeders. And then we inherited from my sister her shelter dog. His name was Chili. The funny thing is her married last name, and this is no joke, she called him Chili, but her last name was Verdi. So he was Chili Dog. He was a green chili dog. And he happened to be one of the best dogs I've ever had. He was a mixed breed. He was smart. He was intelligent. He was, my gosh, he was great. And since then, we've always gotten rescue dogs. Shelter dogs sometimes take a lot of work. They take patience, unless they're a puppy. But with any puppy, those take patience too. But depending on their history, they can take a lot of patience and time to help them acclimate. The shelter gives out this great document that has it how long it actually takes for an animal to kind of get used to you and your family. And if you really want to breed, and I have to tell you, shelters get all kinds of purebreds all the time. So keep an eye out for that. But my son's thinking about adopting a dog next week, the one who owns Bear. And I said, why don't you go to get an Irish Wolfhound rescue? And he said, they don't do this. I said, oh, there's a lot of people who rescue Irish Wolfhounds because people buy them. They're beautiful little puppies, but then they get 185 pounds and they cost a lot of money. And so they give them up. So you can also think about whether it's a Schipperke, a Chihuahua, there's always breed rescues out there. And these are the resources that I used, and they're all links from the different places. And I didn't do any real serious academic research, so I don't have citations in here because this is supposed to be fun. But these are the pages that I did go to help find that history and some of the various things that we talked about today. So any comments, questions? Shall we have a discussion about puppy dogs and pussycats? See, I did put a few cats in here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Roxanne. And now's the time. If you have a question, you can unmute yourself and ask Roxanne, or you're also welcome to type it in the chat.
Roxanne, you have to mention your dad's dog.
Oh, well, yes. My father has a Chihuahua, and my last name is Gonzales, and my dad's name, his Chihuahua's name is Speedy. So if you know Looney Tunes cartoons, you know Speedy Gonzales. And that's actually my father's call sign for he was a military pilot. That was his call sign, Speedy. But he's a Chihuahua, and I love dogs, but he's a mean little guy. He's not well socialized, and he's not well trained. He's a mean little guy. But he's cute. He looks like a little tiny miniature German Shepherd. He's a black and tan. He's really cute. Comments, questions? Vina, who's our Dean of the School of Business and Media Arts, is also on the board of the shelter. So she could help answer some questions as well. Nothing?
I'd say, Roxanne, if you want to, you can mention a little more about Artbark here. It's a pretty great option and cause.
Yeah, actually, in fact, let me go find our site. Let me close out this page here. So as I mentioned, one of the biggest fundraisers we have is Artbark. And most shelters, the one thing I did not mention, most shelters function predominantly through donations. Whether it's donation from a foundation or it's a donation from individuals, but they also are expected to do their own fundraising. And here in New Mexico, here in Las Vegas, our largest fundraiser is Artbark. And what we do is we ask local artisans to donate pieces of their original work, and it gets juried, and then we have a big silent auction. And last year we didn't do it because because of COVID, it seems. We didn't do it last year, but this is our largest fundraiser. And so what we ask people is, so if you know an artist, if you come over here, it says Artbark 2021, and you click on it, it's got a page where you can donate your artwork. It gets juried, and then we put it up. We're going to be, if COVID permitting, we're going to be doing it in the sub ballroom so that we have plenty of room for social distancing. I don't know what the state mandates will be at that point, but if we can't do it face to face like we want to do, we will then go to a virtual Aardvark, which I'd really rather not, because it's just not as fun. And it is a lot of fun. We typically have wine and different things, so we're trying to figure out how we're going to do that this year through Aardvark, to have it open for folks to be able to do everything we normally do. But we'll have to see how that goes. But it is a large fundraiser, and if you don't have any art to donate, please come and bid on some art. It's a lot of fun. It's just a wonderful evening, and we'll have some presentations. And we usually have 2 or 3 really nice pieces that Dr. Minner auctions off for us live, and he is a great auctioneer. So if you want to see Dr. Minner do some wonderful auctioneering, he's great to watch. I also see Ann Bradford here. She's also on our board. She works here at Highlands as well. And let's see, is there any other board members? Ann, do you want to add anything? You've been involved with Aardvark for many, many years.
My apologies, I couldn't find the unmute button. No, I just would encourage people to come to our Aardvark. It's a great evening, as you say. The last time we had it, we were very lucky to have some art that was provided by students.
Yes.
I don't know whether people are familiar, it's the Blue Dog, right? The
Yes.
artist. And the students did their own rendition of Blue Dog, and there were dogs at Christmas, there were dogs with tiaras, there were all sorts of dogs. They were wonderful, and they were put onto a like a fridge magnet. They were about 4 by 4, I believe, and they were sold for $25 each, and boy, did they go quickly. It was wonderful. So it's not all thousands of dollars. There's lots of different types. Oh yes, wonderful. There's lots of different types of art, and to satisfy everybody's tastes.
Yeah, these Blue Dogs were done by one of our classes, school, I think it was a 6th grade class here in Las Vegas. And they donated them, and we put them on a magnet on the refrigerator, and they went like hotcakes, and they were all unique and original. And I was able to get the one with the Christmas scene, and I'm hoping to get the student who owned it, who donated it, to look at this one, to let me use it and have Christmas cards made with it. It's just adorable. And this is the artist, George Rodriguez. He's from Louisiana, and he is no longer with us. But you can see the dog is pretty much the same. He just puts them against different backgrounds. But he's a sweet little guy. I mean, he's kind of like the generic dog that you see roaming the streets. This is a very clever little guy. But the students, it was just so much fun. Those were probably the first things that went. People just went, and I think they were only $25, but a lot of people bought them for $50, $75. I still have mine on my refrigerator. It's beautiful. So we're hoping that maybe something like that can happen again. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Well, thank you so much for joining today. I hope it was somewhat interesting for you and fun to see the puppy dogs and pussycats. Certainly, I learned a lot putting this together. I was just going to talk about shelters and stuff, and I thought, well, how did we even get there? So the history was really a lot of fun for me to learn as well. So thank you so much, and please do support your local shelter, and through volunteering, donating, and take care of your own puppy